Could you stand up? That seat is for my mother-in-law. My son said it, his voice cold as steel. Before I could process it, his hand shoved hard. The chair flipped. I hit the floor under Christmas lights in a chorus of sharp gasps. A wine glass shattered. Shards of glass skittered across the floor. I, the woman who raised my son alone after my husband died, sold my first business to pay his tuition, skipped meals that first year after the funeral just to buy his graduation gown, was shoved onto the freezing tile by the very child I'd sacrificed for. My daughter-in-law covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked. Her mother simply sat in the chair that had just been taken from me and sipped her wine like it was a victory. No one helped me up. I stood on my own, straightened my blouse, and looked around the table that had once been the symbol of my family. They thought I was a weak old woman, but they forgot I built this whole empire with my bare hands. Tonight, I lost a chair. But tomorrow morning, their entire world will lose its seat. My name is Eleanor Price, 69 years old. I've lived by one principle my whole life: if you can raise a roof, never let anyone rip it off your head. I've been broke, slept in my car for 12 months when I started out. Then I built Price Construction, a company with hundreds of employees, handling major commercial projects around Chicago. When my husband Marcus died 5 years ago from cancer, I thought the meaning of my life went into the ground with him. But I still had Aaron, my only son, and I believed everything I did was for him. This afternoon, I went to Aaron's house for Christmas dinner, carrying 2 gifts for my grandchildren, Noah and Sophie. Noah, at 15, is already a head taller than me. Sophie, 12, still wraps her arms around my neck like when she was little. Grandma Eleanor, they ran to me, their laughter so clear it eased my chest. I handed them 2 boxes, a robot model kit and a pink scarf Marcus had left half-knit before he passed. Only in that moment did Christmas feel like it still meant something. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, stepped out of the kitchen with a half-smile. She's always polite, but that look, cold and calculating, as if measuring every word I say. So glad you came early. Dinner is going to be really special, she said, her voice so sweet I had to force a smile back. I know that kind of smile, the smile of someone who sees me as an inheritance waiting its turn. As I hung my coat, Aaron came out of the kitchen with a bottle of wine, but the warmth I remembered wasn't in his eyes. "Hi, Mom, you can leave your things here." No hug, no kiss on the cheek, just a flat voice, almost like an employee speaking to a superior. I looked around. The table was meticulously set. Deep red runner, gold candles, white china, silver knives polished to a mirror. But I noticed 8 place settings even though there were only 6 of us. "Someone else coming?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Oh, right. Jessica's mother is joining us for dinner." The air froze. Victoria Hale. I knew that name all too well. A seasoned businesswoman, 72, who had competed with me directly for 2 decades. We started in construction around the same time, bid on big projects, and she was always the shake your hand, stab your back later type. I didn't hate her, but I never wanted to share a dinner table with her, and tonight she was the guest of honor. When Victoria walked in, her glossy heels clicked like they were tapping on my pride. Aaron rushed over. "Mrs. Hale, what an honor to have you." He smiled, poured wine, pulled out a chair while I watched the scene with a stone in my gut. Why was my son fawning like that? I kept quiet, just wanting the dinner to pass peacefully. When everyone sat down, I took my usual seat at the head of the table next to Aaron, the spot I'd occupied for years since Marcus passed. From there, I'd carved the turkey, told stories from my younger days on job sites, and raised a glass at every reunion. But when Victoria approached, Aaron stood up and turned to me with a frigid look. "Mom, I need you to give that seat to her. She's the guest of honor." I froze. "Aaron, that's my seat. It always has been." He curled his lip, the kind of curl I never thought I'd see from the son I raised with a lifetime of sacrifice. I said, "My mother-in-law sits there." I thought he was joking, but then his hand landed on my shoulder, hard, decisive, and shoved. I went backward. The crack of the chair, the splash of wine, the clang of metal on marble. Everyone went silent. Jessica covered her mouth like a moviegoer at a good scene, and Victoria simply took a sip, eyes satisfied. No one helped me up, not a single apology. I pushed myself to my feet and wiped the wine from my sleeve. In that moment, the pain wasn't physical. It was the collapse of a trust built over 40 years of motherhood. Aaron pulled out the chair for Victoria, sat beside her, and launched into talk about a new joint project between the two companies. I realized he was selling me out, selling the very company I founded to win favor with the mother-in-law who'd just taken my seat at my own table. I said nothing more. I moved to a side chair and listened, each sentence a knife through memory. Every time they laughed, I remembered the nights I stayed up at the shop in 1982, hands covered in cement, Marcus bringing me dinner, little Aaron in his arms waving at me. All those years, apparently for a single shove. When dinner ended, I excused myself to the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door and looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back were bloodshot, not from tears, but from rage packed so tight it turned numb. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and opened 3 names I knew by heart. Ethan Cole, my personal attorney for 30 years. Maya Turner, our CFO, who knows every number in the company. Rick Donovan, our COO, whom I trust more than my own son. I started calling. Ethan, it's a leaner. Prepare to revoke all trust powers and signing authority from Aaron. All of them, he sounded surprised. On Christmas Eve, yes, as soon as humanly possible, I want every document ready with my signature by 8 in the morning. Next, Maya, freeze all joint accounts. Cancel his online banking access. Send me his personal financial report first thing tomorrow. Maya paused, then spoke softly. Mrs. Price, what happened? I just realized I handed the keys to the wrong person. Finally, I messaged Rick. 8 a.m. tomorrow, clear out the CEO's office. You take interim control. He replied after a few seconds. Understood, ma'am. When I hung up, I looked into the mirror again. The woman there was no longer a victim on a cold tile floor. She was a mother who'd woken up. I straightened my blouse and allowed myself a small smile that anyone else would mistake for calm. But inside, the gears had begun to turn. That Christmas night, I didn't just lose a seat. I lost the illusion that blood always equals loyalty. And when I stepped out of the bathroom and back into the candlelit dining room, I already knew the fight had begun. I left my son's house near 10 p.m. The wind off Lake Michigan slapped my face raw, but it couldn't make me any clearer than I already was. Truth is, I had never been this clear. In my old Mercedes, I turned on the heat and sat for a few minutes. Christmas lights from the houses along the street reflected on the windshield like smeared stains. I looked at them and felt bitter. Each bulb out there meant a warm home, a normal dinner, a family that didn't yet know what it was to be shoved by their own flesh and blood. I opened my phone and pulled up my notes, the emergency protocol list I created after Marcus died. Not because I'm paranoid, but because in business, trust is worthless without binding terms. I just never imagined the person who'd force me to trigger it would be my son. Back at my high-rise on Lakeshore, I turned on every light. The harsh white filled the living room like a temporary war room. I hung my coat, poured a whiskey, but didn't drink. I just inhaled the smoky wood and got to work. On the table, my laptop was already logged into Priceabuild Incorporated's secure portal, the child I built over 40 years. Every contract, every figure in that system is tied to my blood, sweat, and soaked shirts on long-ago job sites. And tonight, I would strip the power from the air I'd once trusted completely. I opened the legal authority folder and signed revocations for all financial signatures, contracts, and credit authorizations held by Aaron Price. Access to company accounts, client files, and internal email. Use of the corporate seal. Each e-signature appeared with a timestamp and code. No shaky hand, no hesitation. Next, I opened the personal guarantees file. Every loan, house, car, credit cards, insurance had my name as cosigner. Those were the times I went soft, signing to ease his financial pressure. Enough. I called First Midwest Bank directly. The operator tried to schedule a call for after the holiday, but when she heard my name, she routed me to Laura Benson, a VP I've worked with for years. Mrs. Price, I thought you'd be off for the holiday. No, Laura. I need to cancel all credit guarantees co-signed by me and Aaron Price. A pause. All of them, ma'am, including the Highland mortgage and the sports car, all of them effective when you open in the morning. She hesitated. I have to warn you this will put him into immediate default. I understand and I accept. My voice was low and steady. No anger, no tremor. It wasn't a mother's outburst anymore. It was the voice of an owner who'd realized she was being betrayed inside the company she founded. I hung up and pulled the price-build incorporated bylaws from the safe. I read every clause, every line I'd written over 20 years ago when I incorporated. A quiet relief slid into my chest. Aaron owned no shares. He was only an appointed CEO with no board voting rights. His authority existed only as long as I allowed it. I smiled. For the first time that night, the smile wasn't bitter. Next, I opened his employment contract. I'd approved it myself, adding a clause for immediate termination for loss of trust or conflict of interest. No lawyer needed to explain. I just nodded slightly. Loss of trust. That was tonight. At 12:30, I moved to expense reports. Hundreds of line items filled the screen. Restaurant parties, travel, gifts to phantom clients, even a few transfers to Jessica's personal account. I didn't need to read them all. The late fees, the small penalties snowballing for months, enough to show he'd used company assets for himself. I saved everything, printed 3 copies, and signed. Each click of save sounded like a judge's gavel in my head. Near 2 a.m., I called Maya. Her voice was drowsy, but she snapped awake as I spoke. "Mrs. Price, are you serious? On Christmas Eve, you want to freeze company accounts. Not the company, Maya. Only the accounts Aaron can access. Send the internal notice in the morning with my e-signature. What about control? Hand it to Rick temporarily. He knows what to do." I sent one more text to Rick. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Clear all of Aaron's things from the CEO office. Your interim, I'll be there at 10 to sign officially. And Rick, leave a note on his desk. This office is not for you. He replied a few minutes later. Understood, ma'am. I know this isn't easy, but I'm with you. I leaned back and breathed. The whiskey had gone flat, but I still hadn't touched it. I didn't need a drink. I needed complete clarity to reassess every piece of my life. I opened one more file, Estate Plan 2024. Inside was my old will from Hughes and Cole. I scrolled to beneficiaries. Aaron listed first. I stared at that line for a long time. It felt like looking at a photograph of someone already dead. I called the firm's main line and left an urgent message. Tomorrow I want a meeting. We're rewriting the will, moving all assets into a trust for my grandkids, Noah and Sophie. Education and welfare priority. Remove all portions for Aaron Price. 9 a.m. appointment. Hanging up, I felt a different kind of quiet. Not loneliness, purging, like cutting out a tumor that had lived too long in my own body. Outside, snow began to fall. I walked to the window and looked down at streets veiled in mist. Chicago's lights reflected through the flurries, warm, gold, and hazy. In that moment, I remembered Marcus, the man who once put a trembling hand on my shoulder and said, "If the day ever comes when our child hurts you, don't let blind love make you lose yourself." I whispered, "Don't worry, I remember." Back at the desk, I opened the brown leather journal, the only one I kept after he passed. I wrote December 24th. Aaron shoved me down, but what truly collapsed wasn't me. It was the image of the son I thought I knew. Tomorrow, I'll reset everything. Company, finances, even our name. Not for revenge, but to keep intact what remains of this family's legacy. Respect. I closed the journal and locked the laptop. 3 a.m. The room blazed like daytime, so quiet I could hear the wind whistle through the window sill. I looked at the corner of the desk where a scrap of paper read, "This office is not for you." I slid it into a white envelope, signed beneath it, and tucked it into my briefcase. In the morning, it would sit in the center of Aaron's desk like a verdict that needed no judge. I poured another whiskey and this time drank it down. The heat slid through my throat, snapping me awake one last time before dawn. This Christmas had no gifts, no prayers, only a mother who understood love can't be a shield for betrayal. I sat back, eyes on the window brightening to pale silver. I knew I wouldn't sleep, but my mind had never been sharper. Because on the longest night of my life, I had just signed my own declaration of justice. That Christmas morning, I didn't feel the warmth of the season. I just sat in my study, coffee cooling on the desk, watching sunlight hit the stack of documents I'd signed overnight. Somewhere across the city, I knew Aaron was still asleep, thinking the world still revolved around him. But when he opened his eyes, everything would be different. Per Maya, the bank began processing the guarantee cancellations at 8 in the morning. I could picture it. Aaron in the kitchen, still in pajamas, sipping coffee and watching the news, still savoring the victory dinner with Victoria Hale. Then the phone rang once, then twice, then 3 times. First Midwest Bank was first. The manager's voice was polite. "Mr. Price, the Highland mortgage has lost its guarantor. Under policy, the entire outstanding balance is now due immediately." Aaron must have scoffed, assuming it was a mistake. But then Wells Fargo called. The business line of credit was closed. Citibank called next. Company cards locked. And a fourth call, BMW dealership notifying repossession due to revoked guarantee. Within 20 minutes, what he called life began collapsing in slabs. I didn't hear those calls firsthand, but Maya summarized it in a noon report. In 45 minutes, Aaron Price's personal financial system was frozen. A total of 17 recovery actions were triggered simultaneously. I read it, folded the papers, and set them aside. No thrill, only the feeling of moving a piece back to the square it should have never left. At the same time, Aaron must have thrown on clothes and driven that BMW to the office to clear up the misunderstanding. He still thought that if he showed up and said a sentence to me, everything would be forgiven like always. But this morning, my settings had changed his access. When the elevator opened on the 5th floor where the CEO office sits, the man in the leather chair wasn't Aaron. It was Rick Donovan, my most loyal ally for 30 years. I told Rick last night, no explanations. Just hand him the envelope. On the desk, the envelope lay neatly beside the old nameplate. Aaron Price, Chief Executive Officer. Inside was the termination letter titled Termination, Loss of Trust and Conflict of Interest, and my handwritten note, just 4 words. "This office is not for you." Rick later told me Aaron stood frozen for more than a minute, face drained, eyes locked on that short line like it was burning his skin. Then he asked, voice tight, "What has my mother done?" Rick answered simply, "What she should have done a long time ago." Aaron left the office in silence. Before he could reach the elevator, his phone rang again, this time from the law office. My assistant Janet said it plainly, per legal instruction, any attempt to contact Mrs. Alina Price directly will be considered harassment. All matters must go through counsel. The elevator doors closed on Aaron's face, and when he stepped into the parking lot, his 7 Series BMW was already hooked to a tow truck, the enforcement officer reading the repossession order. I can picture it with painful clarity. The man who once strode into his mother's company in a custom suit stood in an empty lot in the Chicago cold, hands shaking around his phone, having no idea who to call. He didn't know that everyone around him, the employees who once said "Good morning, Mr. Price," now just quietly turned away. I once taught him in business, losing money isn't the real failure. Losing your honor is the end. He didn't listen. Now he understands. When Aaron got home, the foreclosure notice was already taped to the door. The bank's message, the $600,000 mortgage was moving into foreclosure. Jessica stood in the living room, paper in hand, white as a sheet. "What did you do?" she yelled. "They've been calling all morning. They said the guarantees were canceled. The cards are closed. The car has been towed." And this, she threw the paper in his face. "They say the house is being seized." Aaron collapsed into a chair. Every sound around him seemed squeezed out of the air. It's all a misunderstanding. My mother is punishing me." "Punishing you for what?" Jessica's voice cracked. "For shoving her. For humiliating the very woman who raised you with blood and sweat." He said nothing. He covered his face, breathing hard. The house still had Christmas lights twinkling, but that glow only made the scene more bitter. Noah and Sophie peeked from the stairs, eyes wide with confusion. "Go upstairs," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "Staying down here just makes me sadder." When the kids disappeared up the stairs, she sank to the floor, tears streaming. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of king? Your mother gave you everything. Work, a name, opportunities, and you paid her back by shoving her in front of her own grandkids. You know what? Victoria called me this morning." Aaron looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What did your mother say?" Jessica let out a thin laugh. "She said she's going to apologize to your mom for having to witness that humiliation, and she wants to talk about a real partnership." Aaron's face went rigid. "She apologized?" "Yes. She said the woman who deserves respect is a leaner Price, not a leaner's son. That line Maya told me later was exactly what I heard from Victoria Hale in a call at noon that day. She said to me, Aliner, I don't even know what to say. Watching that made me feel ashamed for him. My son-in-law isn't the man you once introduced me to. If you're willing, I'd like to meet and discuss a real collaboration. I simply answered, Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate the honesty. We set a meeting for the new year. As for Aaron, later that afternoon, the neighbors said they saw him wandering in the yard, shirt wrinkled, phone in hand. He kept calling, but no one picked up. Finally, he stood a long time at the front door, staring at the bright red foreclosure notice, then turned and walked toward the train station. Christmas afternoon in Chicago was hushed. Church bells carried through the cold wind and a dusting of snow. In that stream of passersby, no one knew the slow-moving man had once been a CEO, invited to fancy banquets, a man who once had everything. Now he had nothing. No home, no car, no job. I, on the other side of the city, sat in my high-floor office reading reports from Maya and Rick. Outside, the sky was clear, pale sun on the lake. I set my coffee down and exhaled. No, I wasn't happy. I just felt a heavy, necessary calm, like after a storm when someone finally starts putting the roof back on. I knew that as of this morning, Aaron had begun to understand what consequences are. And this was only the first dawn in a long stretch of days he would have to live with his own choices. The morning after Christmas, Chicago's sky was wrapped in a layer of fog like ash. I'm not a superstitious woman, but that day, I believed in things like payback. Every action circles back sooner or later. Maya reported that Aaron hadn't come back to the company. His badge had been deactivated, but no one saw him at any branch office. I didn't ask for more. When a story reaches the point of consequences, it doesn't need narration. That afternoon, Jessica called me. Her voice was shaky but trying to stay steady. Aliner, I'm sorry about Christmas Eve. I didn't dare step between you two, but now I have to do the right thing for Noah and Sophie. I said nothing. She drew a long breath and continued. I'm taking the kids to my parents' place for a while. At least until things settle. I can't have them watching him like this anymore. He's out of control. I heard her stifle a sob through the line. I know that feeling, the thin line between love and despair where you finally accept that forgiveness won't help anyone. Do what you need to do, I said. But tell Noah and Sophie their grandma is still here. If they need anything, they just have to call. She whispered, okay, and hung up. 2 days later, Jessica's attorney met with Aaron and served temporary separation papers. Under the terms, she would have temporary custody and retain the remaining household assets until the court issued a final ruling. Aaron just stared at the stack of documents. No argument, no defense. When the lawyer asked, do you want to add anything? He said quietly, no, leave it. I have nothing left to bargain with. They said he signed without looking up, like that signature wasn't ending a marriage so much as certifying the failure of his own life. By then, the house had been partially sealed because the bank had initiated foreclosure. Landline cut, credit cards dead. I pictured him sitting in a dim living room, TV murmuring to no one next to an empty suitcase and a chipped mug. On the third night after Christmas, Noah called me in a tiny voice. Grandma, is Dad sick? I asked, why do you say that? He just sits and stares at the wall. I ask him things and he only says go to bed, tomorrow will be better. But the next morning is the same. Mom says we're moving. I don't want to go, Grandma. I swallowed and kept my voice as even as I could. Noah, grown-ups' mistakes aren't kids' mistakes. Wherever you are, I'm still your grandma. My door is always open. Okay, he whispered. I just want us to have dinner together again like before. I didn't know what to say, so I said, maybe not now, but someday, kiddo. Someday. When I hung up, I sat a long time. I've watched buildings collapse in my life, but no collapse hurts like a family cracking from the inside. The next morning, Jessica texted me. Please don't worry, I'm taking the kids to my parents. I just want you to know I respect your decision. I'm not asking for help or trying to interfere, I just have to protect them from this. I read it and replied simply, I understand and I respect that. Take care of the kids. Don't let them think grown-ups' messes are theirs to carry. I didn't blame Jessica. She did what any mother would do when the home no longer feels safe. The price Erin pays now isn't just losing a job and a house. It's losing those small eyes that once looked at him with absolute trust. By afternoon, I got word Erin went to see Victoria Hale. A neighbor said Erin stood outside the gate nearly 20 minutes in the cold, coat too thin, face pale. When Victoria came out, she folded her arms and looked down from the steps at the man who used to be her son-in-law. "I need to talk," Erin pleaded. Victoria gave a cold half-smile, voice like steel. "About what?" "The part where you knocked your mother down or the part where you blew up your family. I know I was wrong, but you once said you believed in me." "I did once. Not anymore. A woman who can humiliate her own mother can betray anyone." Erin stood there speechless. Victoria went on, "I don't hate you. I just feel sorry for the people around you. Your wife, your kids, they don't deserve to pay for your ego." Then she turned and went back inside, leaving Erin in the white snow with the wind cutting through the iron gate. He didn't know I also got a phone call from Victoria afterward, relaying those same words. Victoria added, "Eleanor, your son has lost the one thing money can't buy back: respect. And I think only time will teach him that." I answered softly, "I hope so." That evening, Jessica came to pack. Noah and Sophie sat on the stairs, eyes red. She didn't cry, she just worked in silence. Each time she folded a shirt, she paused for a few seconds like swallowing a knot in her throat. Erin sat motionless in the corner, saying nothing, stopping nothing. When she sealed the last box, Jessica looked around the house once full of laughter and said, voice low enough to vanish into the air, "I can't teach the kids to respect family while living with a man who does the opposite." Erin lowered his head. No response. She set her wedding ring on the table and walked to the door. Before stepping out, she turned back, eyes wet. "I once believed you could become the kind of man your mother is. I was wrong." The door clicked shut. A small sound, but enough to tighten my chest when Rick later told me that detail. That afternoon, a small moving truck pulled up. 2 movers carried the boxes out. Piece by piece, the decor, the photos, the curtains disappeared from the house already gone cold. When the truck pulled away, Erin stood in the empty yard, hands in his pockets, head down. The bank sealed the front door by day's end. According to the report, Erin had exactly $300 left. No car, no house, no wife and kids, no job, just a small suitcase and a family photo with yellowing corners. That night, I sat in my office looking out at a city lighting up. The blinking lights reflected across my face, and I knew a part of my heart was quietly cracking too. No one wins in this story. Not me, not Erin, not Jessica, no one. Only a hollow remains where the home used to be, now just wind slipping through the walls. I reminded myself I couldn't go soft. Because if I did, every lesson about honor, self-respect, and consequences would be erased. And if I didn't do this, Erin might never learn how to stand up like a real person. I still remember the first night Erin left that house. Snow covered the street. Tilted streetlights cast dim shadows on the damp pavement. The man who once ran a company worth tens of millions of dollars dragged a small suitcase into a cheap hotel near the train station. The glass door was fogged with steam. The sign, "Rooms available $49 per night," blinked like a taunt. The young clerk handed over a key, not recognizing the face that had appeared in the local business pages a few years back. Erin paid cash, the last money in his wallet, then climbed the worn stairs, each step creaking like a tired groan. The room was small, not even 100 square feet. A bed that squeaked, a thin curtain fluttering where cold air slipped through a loose window frame. He set down the suitcase and opened it. A few wrinkled clothes, a scratched wristwatch, and a family photo from last Christmas. Jessica's bright smile, 2 kids holding presents, and him in the middle, chin raised like he was untouchable. Now that picture was the only thing in his life still intact. Erin sat on the edge of the bed and checked his banking app. The balance flashed, $297.43. He did the math. $49 a night for the room, plus tax, a few cheap snacks at most 6 days. After that, nothing. Hunger pushed him to open a packet of dry noodles from his suitcase, something he'd never even looked at before. He poured hot water from the communal kettle, sat on the windowsill, and ate in silence. Outside, the train slid by, its lights streaking past like memories. The next day, Aaron started calling for jobs. First was a small contractor in the suburbs. The manager hesitated as soon as he heard the name. "You're Aaron Price from Priceabuild Incorporated." "Yes, I used to run things there." The reply was short. "Sorry, we're not hiring for management and we don't want to get involved in that situation." Click. Second company, third, fourth, the same result. News of the firing and the internal scandal had spread across the industry. Everyone had heard Mr. Price was removed by his own mother for misconduct and conflicts of interest. He heard the refusal so many times they stopped stinging. Only emptiness remained. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, I did the last thing needed to maintain safe distance. I authorized Hughes and Cole to send a formal cease and desist. At our client's instruction, Mr. Aaron Price is not permitted to contact Mrs. Eleanor Price directly, nor to approach company offices, the private residence, or any board members. Any violation will be addressed under applicable law. When I signed it, I didn't feel relief. It felt like closing the last door between mother and son. A door I put there not out of spite, but to force him to face himself. That night I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the street, the wind slicing cold against my face. I kept seeing Aaron in that cheap hotel. I had no regrets, but I understood. For a man to reach his bottom, he has to pass through a very deep loneliness. In the narrow room, Aaron sat in front of a mirror, yellow light washing over his pale face. He stared at himself a long time. A man with messy hair, patchy stubble, and bruised eyes. No suit, no luxury watch, no CEO title. "This is the consequence," he said quietly, almost to himself. Not an accident, a choice. For the first time, he admitted it. No more blaming his mother, the situation, Jessica, or Victoria. Just him and his own mistakes. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had pressed on his mother's shoulder on Christmas Eve, then shoved. A chill ran through him. For the first time, he felt real shame. That night the phone rang. It was Noah. His voice was innocent but tight. "Dad, Grandma visited today. She hugged me and Sophie and brought pastries. She told us, don't carry the weight of grown-ups. She looked strong, just a little sad." Aaron stayed silent, every word cutting into his chest. Noah went on. "Dad, I don't think Grandma's mad. I think she's sad. I asked why you're not living together, and she said everyone has to learn their own lesson. I don't totally get it." Aaron swallowed. "What do you think, Noah?" After a pause, the boy said, "I think it's simple. When I hit a kid at school, I get punished. You pushed Grandma, so you got punished. That seems fair." Aaron let out a small laugh and covered his face. The laugh and a sob tangled together. "You're right, Noah, exactly right." Before hanging up, Noah added, "Grandma says when I grow up, I'll understand. I think you're growing up again too, right?" Aaron's throat tightened. "Yeah, I'm learning from the beginning." After the call, he stared out the window as the snow thickened. He opened his old laptop and pulled up his resume. Flourishes popped up on the screen. CEO managing more than 200 employees. Increased revenue by 300%. Guest speaker at Regional Finance Conference. He crossed out each line. Every strike cut into the illusion. When he finished, only a few simple lines remained. Experience, project management, site supervision, hands-on work with build crews. Skills, accountability, punctuality, honesty. He read the new resume, short, true, no gloss. For the first time, he felt lighter. Not because it was good, but because it didn't lie. Near midnight, Aaron still couldn't sleep. He wrote a few lines in a notebook. "No begging, no blaming, no crawling back to ask my mother for help. Just start over from zero the way she did." He folded the notebook and set it beside the family photo. In that picture, I was smiling, the gentle smile he once mistook for weakness. Now he understood it was the smile of someone who had already survived what he was living through. Across town, I couldn't sleep either. I sat by the window watching the street turn white. In my mind, the image of the son I used to know faded, replaced by the shape of a man learning how to stand up straight again. Some lessons only loss can teach. And some people only value the ground after hitting bottom. I closed my eyes and said inwardly, "Own it, Aaron. I won't save you anymore. But if you truly stand up, I'll know." The city was quiet that night. In two different rooms, one in a shabby hotel, one in a high-rise, two people stayed awake. One learning to forgive, one learning to endure. And between them, a fragile trust began to flicker like a small light in a frozen winter night. I don't know what was in Aaron's head when he walked into that company, but that morning, Rick sent me a short message. You should know, he just took a job with a night cleaning company, Midnight Shine Cleaners. I read the name over and over. A poetic kind of irony. The man who used to sign contracts worth tens of millions of dollars was now mopping someone else's floors. And strangely, I didn't feel sorry. Some journeys require humility to guide a person back to where they belong. According to Brenda Salazar, the night shift manager there, who told it later, Aaron came in for an interview on a Monday afternoon wearing an old dress shirt, resume folded in half under his arm. What experience do you have in cleaning? Brenda asked, her voice tired after a long shift. Aaron answered honestly, none, but I learn fast, I need the job. Brenda looked at him for a long moment. Midnight Shine isn't like the offices you used to work in. We don't care about degrees or the price name here. If you're late once, you're done. Understand? Understood. Starting pay is $1,200 a month. Night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. no shuttle. You handle your own transportation. I'll take it. She studied him a few more seconds, then nodded and wrote on the form, Aaron Price, night shift cleaner. On his first night, Aaron arrived on time. Outside, the January wind was biting with a few flakes of snow drifting across the street. Inside, the lobby of a glass high-rise blazed with light. Brenda handed him a navy uniform, a mop, a spray bottle, and rubber gloves. Just remember, scrub every chair leg thoroughly. Office clients always bend down to check. They won't remember faces, but they'll remember any spot you miss. Aaron just nodded. When the last office lights finally went out, their shift truly began. The first coworker he met was Miguel, an immigrant from Ecuador who always wore headphones and hummed softly while pushing the trash cart. The second was Tasha, a single mom of 3 who used to wait tables before switching to cleaning so she could have daytime hours for her kids. The third was Olivia, a community college senior, saving every dollar to continue into nursing. No one knew who Aaron used to be. And for the first time in his life, he felt free of the surname that once weighed on his shoulders. The hands that once signed million-dollar contracts now gripped a cold, wet mop. But instead of shame, he felt calm. Because this time, every dollar he earned was tied to his own breath, not to his mother's legacy or a title on a business card. The first nights were harsh. His hands blistered from chemicals. His shoulders ached from hauling heavy trash bins. Once he spilled a bucket, the floor turned slick and Brenda scolded him bluntly. If you can't be careful, you're out. He only lowered his head. I understand. No excuses, no back talk. As time passed, Aaron learned to live quietly, arrive on time, and be meticulous. He wiped every door frame, polished every desk surface, scrubbed away smudges so small others wouldn't notice. Whenever Brenda inspected, she just nodded and wrote, Price thorough. A short note, but to him, it was the first sign of real trust. The first month's paycheck wasn't much, but when Brenda handed him the small envelope, Aaron held it so tightly his hands trembled. $1,200, money he once blew on a single client dinner, now stood as proof he could still survive. For the first time in his life, money wasn't tied to status. It was tied to sweat. He rented a small room in a Wicker Park boarding house, sharing with 2 other men, a mechanic and an electrical engineering student. The place had only a bunk bed, a hot plate, and a window facing the tracks. Aaron slept on the top bunk, ate cheese sandwiches every morning, drank instant coffee, and commuted by train. No one in the building knew he once managed hundreds of employees. And he didn't need anyone to know. He began living within his actual means. No debt, no credit cards, no cosigners, just work, labor, and quiet. Each week, Aaron still called Noah and Sophie. The calls were short. Homework, school, friends, no one mentioned me. No one talked about the past. He just asked, what did you eat today? Did you help your mom? Then ended with, sleep well. Dad loves you. After each call, he sat a long time staring at the dark screen, exhaling as if completing a small act of atonement. One night, while mopping the 50th floor of a big office tower, Aaron paused by the glass and looked down at the city. Below, streets crisscrossed like veins, lights stretching endlessly. He had viewed this same scene from a CEO's office, UV-coated windows, an Italian leather chair, an oak conference table. Now he saw the same city from behind a mop and the smell of cleaning solution. Instead of loss, he felt at peace. He understood humility, what it means to exist without reputation, without inheritance, only with two hands. He smiled slightly. For the first time in years, his smile held no arrogance, no shell of self-satisfaction, only self-respect. A few weeks later, Brenda called him into the break room. I heard from Miguel you cleaned the entire 10th floor even though it wasn't assigned to you. Why? Aaron answered simply. It was dirty, so I did more. Brenda studied him, then chuckled. You're odd. Most people do the minimum, you do extra. I've fallen short for too long, he said quietly. Now I'm trying to make up for it. Brenda said nothing more, just nodded. For the first time, someone here respected Aaron not because of the price name, but because of how he worked. I learned about it from Rick, who happened to meet Brenda at a city labor seminar. Rick told me, she said he works like he's paying a debt. No chatter, no complaints, just head down, cleaning everything around him. I listened without replying. Inside, something pinched and eased at once. I didn't hope my son would become a CEO again. I only hoped he'd learn what I once taught and he never heard. No job is beneath you if you do it with honor. That night, when the city was quiet, I sat by the window, watching the distant lights. Somewhere out there, my son was holding a mop, bent over a cold pane of glass. Yet maybe something warm was starting to glow inside him. Something money can't buy. Another beginning. A first time at being a real man. I smiled faintly, closed my eyes, and said inwardly, hold on to that, son. Only when you learn to bow can you stand steady. By March, Chicago was finally loosening its grip on winter's lingering cold. Snow melted slowly along the paths in Lincoln Park, revealing wet grass and beads of dew on the leaves. That afternoon, I met with Victoria Hale, the woman I'd considered a rival only months earlier. Now we were partners, a change I hadn't expected. But life spins on the most unexpected axes. We chose a long wooden table near the lake and spread out drawings for a new tower. Its foundation would be the deepest downtown. Victoria set down her coffee, glanced up, eyes bright in the late light. Eleanor, I have to say, we should have worked together sooner. I laughed softly. Maybe when we're younger, our egos stand taller than the buildings we're trying to put up. She nodded. But now it's different. You're as sharp as ever. I really respect the way you handled the load calculations here. I read your model and just wanted to ask, if we add 2 more floors, can the base take it? I pulled out a pen, leaned over the drawing, and sketched a few quick lines. It can. If we switch the core material to a lighter alloy to reduce dead load and widen the footing by about 8 feet. Cost goes up, but safety holds. I did this back in 2007. Victoria clapped my shoulder, smiling. You refuse to get old, Eleanor. I like working with someone who knows every inch of the ground. We kept hashing through details, our laughter mixing with the wind and the sound of kids playing nearby. I didn't know that in a corner of the park, just a short walk away, Aaron was standing quietly watching. He told me months later that he'd only meant to walk and clear his head that day. When he saw me and Victoria there, he froze. My coat lifted in the breeze. My hands still moved deftly across the drawings. My eyes shone like job site lights from years ago. I looked happy, not showy happiness. Peace. A kind he'd never seen on my face during his CEO years. He hid behind the trees, catching pieces of our talk as the wind carried them. Victoria said, ever think about reconciling with Aaron? I paused, looked out toward the lake, and my voice dropped. Reconcile? I don't hate him, Victoria, but I can't pretend nothing happened. Are you punishing him? I shook my head. No, I'm teaching him a lesson. Punishment is to hurt. A lesson is to save. If I forgive too soon, the lesson loses its weight. It has to sink in first. Forgiveness isn't a gift, it's the result of understanding. Victoria was quiet a few seconds, then said softly, You're the truest kind of mother I've met. I gave a small laugh. I'm just an old woman fixing my bad blueprint. Maybe I spoiled him, made him think a mother's love never runs out. Now he has to learn everything has a load limit, even trust. He told me that when he heard that, it felt like a hand squeezing his heart. He knew I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't waiting either. Victoria and I wrapped up as the sun tilted over the lake, gold light flickering across the blueprints. We gathered the papers and shook hands. Victor said, "You know, Aliner, I thought you'd fall apart after all that, but now I see you're stronger than ever." I answered, "No one starts strong, Victoria. You only get strong when you're forced to stand." Then we left the park. Behind the trees, Aaron stood there for a long time. I don't know exactly when he walked away, only that night he walked a long stretch with his mind spinning. He said it felt like seeing a world he no longer belonged to. His mother had moved on, kept working, kept succeeding, kept smiling, unhaunted by the loss of her only son. For the first time, Aaron understood. I didn't need him to exist. No more waiting, no more open doors, no more second guessing. And that's what woke him up, he said. On the way back to the boarding house, he stopped at a small cafe. From a corner seat, he watched workers getting off shift, holding cheap coffee, chatting easily. Maybe, he thought, I've never really worked. All these years, everything had come too easily. When I was at my peak, he got privilege, preference, and praise he hadn't earned. He mistook that for capability when it was just the privilege of being a price. Now sitting among ordinary laborers, he saw the difference clearly. These people weren't rich or powerful, but they felt shame when they were wrong and pride when they were right. He, after all those years, had lived backward. That night, back at the boarding house, Aaron opened the small notebook he'd kept since losing everything. He wrote, "Mom has moved on. She isn't waiting for me. So what am I waiting for? I'm not studying to be a CEO again. I'm studying to be dependable. From now on, every shift is my ethics exam." The next morning, he showed up an hour early at Brenda's office. "Miss Brenda, if there are hard shifts, give them to me." She frowned. "You sure? That's the industrial floors, dirtiest and most dangerous, I'm sure." From then on, Aaron took the heaviest loads, the highest floors, the latest hours. When a coworker called out sick, he covered. When someone skipped the equipment rooms, he volunteered for overtime. Brenda once asked, "Are you trying to prove something?" Aaron smiled. "No, I'm just retaking life's ethics course." I didn't learn any of this right away. A few months later, Brenda wrote me, not out of curiosity but respect. She wrote, "I don't know what happened between you and Aaron, but you should know, he works like he's paying someone back. Never late, never argues, never leaves a smudge. Maybe that's the only way he can keep his self-respect." When I finished reading, I just stared out the window. Wind off Lake Michigan rattled the curtain. I understood the son who shoved me on Christmas Eve was now choosing to bend, not out of shame, but because he'd begun to feel the weight of humility. Life has its own strange curriculum. I didn't need to shout or seek revenge. I only had to step back and let him see himself in the mirror of failure. Maybe that's the only lesson a mother truly ought to leave behind. 3 months had passed since the afternoon he saw me in Lincoln Park. Spring had come to the city, the air faintly damp, trees along Michigan Avenue pushing out new leaves. I hadn't seen Aaron, but through a few channels I knew he was still at Midnight Shine Cleaners. What surprised me wasn't that he stuck it out, but that he really changed. According to Brenda, for 3 straight months, Aaron wasn't late once. At 10 p.m., when the city was just settling into sleep, he started his shift, floor by floor, polishing each stair tread, never complaining. When a lead was sick or someone else called out, he took on the heavier load. The dusty equipment rooms, the cold basement, the long hallways that reeked of chemicals. At first, Brenda thought it was a temporary push from someone desperate for work. But when she saw Aaron re-clean the entire 30th floor after the day crew did a sloppy job, her view began to shift. "I've never seen someone use a ruler to check the straight line on a floor edge," Brenda said. "He cleans like he's building a house, not mopping one." One morning she handed Aaron a ring of keys and said, "You'll take floors 45 through 50. Only people I trust get this zone. Don't let me down." Aaron took them, just nodded, "Thank you. I'll keep it cleaner than my old reputation ever was." Brenda laughed but felt a spark of respect. To her, he wasn't a failure trying to salvage himself anymore. He was a man truly starting over. With the added hours, Aaron earned a bit more. He left the shared room and rented a tiny studio near the train, half the size of his old kitchen, but clean, quiet, with a window over a narrow alley lit by old yellow lamps. He hung only 2 things on the wall: a photo of Noah and Sophie in the park and a white sheet of paper with a shaky line. "Did you live worthy today? Every morning before work, he looked at that question as if checking himself. I heard from Jessica that each month Aaron sent a small amount to the kids. He called it tutoring money. It wasn't much, enough for a few books, but she said, voice trembling as she told it, he wrote clearly on the envelope, not guilt money, a father's money. Jessica didn't reply, but she didn't refuse it. She understood it wasn't begging anymore. It was responsibility. Aaron tracked every expense carefully. Rent, train fare, food, the kids' study money, and a little set aside for the safety training course he just enrolled in. Every dollar was counted, recorded, weighed, something he'd never done before, even when he managed budgets in the millions. On weekends, he went to the church near his building, not to ask for miracles, but to wash dishes in the soup kitchen. People said he arrived early, scrubbed stockpots, wiped every steel tray, spoke little, only smiled when the seniors thanked him. When someone asked why he did it, he answered, to remember I still owe the world a decent debt. In that place, no one knew he had once been a CEO. They only knew there was a graying man who rolled up his sleeves, washed dishes until they squeaked, and always said thank you, even for a cup of coffee. One night during the mid-shift break, Aaron sat with Miguel, his Ecuadorian coworker, in the basement break area. Miguel split his sandwich in half and handed him a piece. You know, when I first came here, I was an engineer too. But my English was bad, so no one hired me. I've worked here 7 years, I'm not rich but I sleep well. Aaron stayed quiet and nodded. Miguel looked at him and smiled. You're different from them, Aaron. You used to have a lot, so now you understand the value of a little. Maybe, Aaron said slowly. When you have too much, you forget the most important thing, keeping your self-respect when your hands are dirty. They fell silent, shared a laugh, then stood up and went back to work. That night, while cleaning the windows on the 50th floor, Aaron saw my building in the distance, the Pricehail Construction logo glowing on the crown. The next day's paper ran an interview with me and Victoria about the new project. The reporter wrote, 2 veteran businesswomen joined forces, bringing a golden generation vision back to Chicago. Aaron read the article on his break and just sighed. No jealousy, no sadness. He quietly folded it and put it in his locker. For the first time, he understood. She didn't need a CEO with the Price surname. She needed people who respected the work and the people. That night, back in his room, Aaron opened his notebook and made 2 lists. One page read, the 10 biggest mistakes of my life. Another read, 10 actions to make it right. On the first list, the top line was, forgetting that my mother's honor is also my honor. And on the second list, the top line was, live so my 2 kids can proudly say that's my dad. He taped both pages to the door next to the old question, did you live worthy today? Every morning before leaving, he read them, not to punish himself but to remember. Then he added one small habit. Each morning, he had to write a single line on the blank sheet next to it. What will I take responsibility for today? Day 1, keep floor cleaner than yesterday. Day 2, don't complain when asked to work overtime. Day 10, thank a coworker instead of staying silent. Day 30, lift my head when I look in the mirror. They were small lines, but to me, when Brenda sent the photo, I could see clearly. This was a new fence Aaron was building around himself. Not with concrete, not with steel, but with discipline and self-respect. One night after reading Brenda's email, I sat a long time by the window. She wrote, I don't know how you raised him, but now I understand. He's not trying to earn forgiveness. He's learning to live like a man his mother could trust again. I didn't reply right away. I just looked down at the city lights and felt myself ease. I understood after a sapling is broken, it can grow back if it turns toward the light. And my son, though he had fallen all the way down, had finally started laying down the habits of a decent person. Time has a way of changing people, not with a storm but with steady, silent drops of water. For Aaron, a year passed with no victories, no status, no audience, only labor and repetition. But that repetition reshaped him bit by bit. 12 months after starting at Midnight Shine Cleaners, Aaron was promoted to night shift lead at the Keough Towers complex, the new riverfront skyscraper in Chicago. The job wasn't glamorous, still cleaning, still checking elevators, still supervising floors, but this time he was responsible for an 11-person team. His pay rose to $1,800 a month along with a heavier ring of keys. When Brenda handed him the new nameplate, she said, "You've come a long way, Aaron. Don't forget why you started." He smiled, "Thank you. I just hope each day I don't have to start over because of my own mistakes." He moved to a tiny fourth-floor apartment in an old building off North Avenue. Just one window facing the red brick wall next door, a battered wooden table, and a chair he'd found on the street. He didn't own much, but it was so clean and orderly that Brenda once joked, "You're about to turn into a minimalist." Aaron only answered, "After losing almost everything, I learned how little I need to live in peace." On the wall, the photo of Noah and Sophie was still there, the frame a bit worn, but their smiles the only real light in the small room. That June, Sophie called on video. 13 now, hair in a high ponytail, still chirpy like when she was little. "Dad, I want to show you I took first place in English." Aaron laughed, still wearing work gloves. "Really? I knew you could do it." Sophie squinted at him and said, "Your voice sounds different." "Different how?" "Calmer than before. Not like back then, always rushed and snappy." The words left Aaron quiet. Nothing hurts more than your child noticing you were never at peace. Nothing warms more than knowing they can see you've changed. Since taking the lead role, Aaron stopped talking about goals, about returning to the game or getting his name back. He learned to stay put in the present. Mop floors, brew coffee, check chemicals, submit time sheets. No more obsession with titles, no more comparisons with others. Each day he asked only one question. "Did I do well enough today?" One autumn evening while filling out the logbook, Aaron got a text from Noah. "Grandma asked how you're doing. I told her you have a job and a stable place." She just nodded and said, "Good. I hope your dad is learning what he needs to learn." Aaron read it 3 times, not because of the content, but because he could hear my imagined voice in each word. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like disappointment. It sounded like careful concern. Not forgiveness, but a small light at the end of the road. He didn't text back right away. He just sat there, eyes on the window where the streetlight painted a pale yellow stripe across the wall. Inside him, something slowly loosened. Not tears, but a tension that had lasted a decade. By December, Chicago was white again. Christmas returned with old memories, the night of the dinner when he pushed down the very mother who had built an entire life. But this year was different. Aaron sat alone in the last pew at St. Monica's after most people had left. The tree in the nave still glowed. The air held candle wax and pine. He folded his arms, bowed his head, and whispered as if to himself, "Thank you that I still have the strength to start over." No pleading, no excuses, no demand to be forgiven. Only gratitude for a healthy body, honest work, and 2 children to believe in. After leaving the church, Aaron walked through the night market. Colored lights hung everywhere, snow drifting lightly. He stopped at a tiny stationery store, faded sign, windows fogged. In the case were stacks of plain white paper, the no-brand kind. He went in and bought a ream and a cheap fountain pen. The clerk asked, "Writing Christmas cards?" Aaron smiled. "No, I'm writing what I've never been able to say." Back at the apartment, he made a cup of instant coffee and sat at the old table. On the wall, the kid's photo watched him, reminding him of every reason to keep living decently. Outside, snow fell quietly. He took a breath, uncapped the pen, and put the first line on the page. "Mother, I'm not writing to apologize, because I know an apology has no value if the person saying it hasn't changed. I just want you to know I've learned what I once refused to learn. That honor doesn't come from a title, but from how you work when no one is watching. That money can't measure dignity. And silence can be deeper than any excuse. I'm no longer angry at you for what you did, because now I understand you didn't punish me. You saved me from my own arrogance. If one day you read these lines, I only want you to know I'm still working, still standing straight, and still trying to live worthy of the price name. Not so you'll forgive me, but so I can forgive myself." He set the pen down, hands trembling slightly. The paper smelled of coffee, the letters tilted, but every line was true. No flourish, no request, just a man who had completed a full circle of pride and returned with bare hands. That night he didn't send the letter. He folded it neatly and slipped it into the drawer beside the family photo. Then he turned off the light, lay down, and listened to the snow tick softly against the glass. Sleep came slowly but peacefully. No more dreams of that Christmas night. No more pictures of me falling to the cold floor. Only one thought followed him into sleep. Tomorrow I'll mop again, and I'll do it better than today. Outside, Chicago was lit. Inside the small apartment, a man who had lost everything had begun to find himself through simplicity, honesty, and a deep gratitude for life. 2 days after that Christmas night, Chicago was still buried in snow. The sky was silver gray, wind rattled the window panes, and Lake Michigan lay oddly still. Aaron sat in his small apartment with a blank page, a cold cup of coffee, and an old fountain pen. He knew he had to finish today. Not because he hoped to get anything back, but because he owed a truth that needed to be said, not for forgiveness, but to close a chapter. For the first line, he wrote slowly, carefully, "Dear Mrs. Price, not Mother, because he knew he hadn't yet earned the right to say those two words again. Over the last year, he'd learned that respect isn't in blood ties, it's in how you treat another's honor. And he had once done the opposite. He began the letter without excuses, only total admission. I, or rather, the man who once carried the Price name, did the unacceptable. That night when I shoved you, I didn't just hurt a mother, I betrayed everything you taught me. Self-respect, patience, and limits. I know no apology can erase that image, but if I could go back, I wouldn't try to justify anything. I would just stand there and take the slap I deserved. He paused, looked at the line he'd written, and exhaled. His pen shook a little, but he kept going. After losing everything, I thought I'd hit bottom. But the real bottom wasn't losing money, status, or a house. Bottom was realizing I did exactly what the best mother in the world never thought I could do. He continued, his voice in the letter steadier now, clear and firm. I used to think manual work was shameful. Now I understand mopping floors, washing dishes, pushing a trash cart is not shameful. Shame is having strong hands and only knowing how to give orders. These months with a mop taught me what titles never could. Dignity isn't in the job you do, it's in how you do it. He paused, took a sip of cold coffee, and wrote again, the strokes surer. A simple life taught me limits and discipline. I used to live like the world owed me. Now I know I'm the one who owes the world. I don't count money anymore. I count the days I don't do wrong. I don't dream of titles, I dream of sleeping without regret. I understand why you and Mrs. Victoria work together because you need someone who respects you, not someone who shares your name. That's right. And I should have been the first to see it. But I wasn't humble enough. He sat with that line for a long time, fingers brushing over the words. The picture of me and Victoria in Lincoln Park returned, me leaning over the blueprint with a calm smile, Victoria nodding with respect. Aaron remembered the sharp pain in his chest, not jealousy, but the knowledge that he'd once had a chance to stand there and had thrown it away. In the next part, his tone softened, not self-torment, but the voice of someone whose lessons had sunk in. I'm not asking you to forgive me. If forgiveness comes too soon, it ruins the lesson I'm learning. I know that to earn back the trust of the woman who once trusted me most, words won't do it, only consistent actions for years. I won't ask to meet. I know I'm not worthy yet. It may take years, maybe a lifetime. I accept that because fairness isn't being forgiven. It's living well even if you aren't. He put the pen down and sat very still. The room was quiet except the clock and the wind at the frame. Then he wrote the final lines, plain, unsentimental, true. If I'm never forgiven, I'm still grateful because the consequences saved me. By pulling your hand away, you made me stand on my own feet. By staying silent, you taught me the voice of conscience. Thank you for letting me lose everything so I could still find myself. Signed, Aaron Price. He reread it from start to finish. There wasn't a single pleading line, not one sentence asking to start over, only acceptance and gratitude. He folded the letter, slid it into a white envelope, and wrote the address for Price Hale Construction. Under sender, he didn't write his name, just 2 letters, AP. The next morning, he stepped out while the snow was still falling. The wind slapped his face, but he felt warm inside. He stopped at the corner post office, sent it certified, and paid a few extra dollars to be sure it would reach the recipient. The clerk asked, "Do you want a signature on delivery?" Aaron shook his head. "No need. If she wants to, she'll know." That evening, back at the apartment, he made coffee and opened the draft to read it once more. He examined every sentence, every word, making sure no excuses were hiding in it. No more voice of a son looking for a way back. Only the voice of a man who knows he was wrong. He folded the draft and tucked it into his wallet. From now on, it would be a daily reminder, not to show off, not to wait for a reply, but to remember that some mistakes must be carried, not erased. Late that night, when the clock struck 10, Aaron put on his coat, picked up his small lunchbox, and left the apartment. Outside, the streets were still layered with snow. He walked slowly, his breath turning white in the air. A few people on the street recognized him, the new night shift lead at Keough Towers, and nodded hello. He nodded back gently. Passing a shop window, he saw his reflection. No longer the proud CEO from years ago, but an ordinary working man with a straight back and a steady gaze. In his coat pocket, the original letter was gone, but the draft was still in his wallet next to the photo of his two children. He touched it lightly, as if touching the part of his conscience that had been patched back together. Then he walked through the building gate, greeted the guard, put on his gloves, and started the night shift. The old mop was still in his hands. The long hallway still glowed with white lights. Everything was the same as before, only the man was different. And when I, Eleanor Price, received that letter many days later, the envelope was wrinkled, the AP blurred by damp. I didn't open it right away. I just held it for a long time and felt a warmth slip into the coldest winter. It wasn't forgiveness. It was trust being reborn, quietly, like grass sprouting under snow. About 3 weeks after Aaron mailed the certified letter, on a February morning, the courier knocked on his small apartment door. A cream-colored envelope, no return address, only one handwritten line in a script so familiar his chest tightened. From E. Price. He held it for a long time without opening it. His hand trembled as if opening it might make what was inside disappear. Then he took a breath, sat at the table, and pulled out the page. Inside was just a single sheet, black ink, neat, decisive handwriting, exactly like the woman I had always been. I have read it many times. I'm glad you're growing up. I'm not ready to meet, maybe never. But I am proud of the man you're choosing to become. Keep going. That was all. No signature, no closing, no mother or son. Just a thin piece of paper that to Aaron weighed as much as the world. He sat still for a long time. No tears, no smile, just the feeling of hearing a familiar sound after years of silence. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that I had seen his effort, that behind the walls of silence there was still a small door left unlocked. The line, "I am proud of the man you're choosing to become," choked him up. Not my son, but the man you're choosing to become. A deliberate phrasing, separating the former self from the present one, as if allowing him to be reborn without erasing the past. Aaron folded the letter and put it in the nightstand drawer, next to the photo of Noah and Sophie. He didn't seal it, didn't lock it, but every time he came home from work, he opened it and looked, like a small ritual, not to search for hope, but to remind himself that respect doesn't need applause. To him, it wasn't a mother's reply. It was a verdict from one woman to another who was trying to make amends. Not warm but fair, not close but true, and that was enough to light his heart. He didn't call Jessica to boast. He didn't text Noah or Sophie. He didn't tell Brenda or Miguel. That letter was just for him, and he wanted to keep it as a private asset, not to prove anything but to preserve it. That night he went to work as usual. Keough Towers shone in the cold wind, its glass reflecting the snow-covered sky. He arrived 10 minutes early, changed, prepped his tools, and began the shift. But something was different that night. Walking the corridor, he instinctively straightened the wet floor sign so the wind wouldn't knock it over. Wiping the lobby chairs, he lined each one up exactly, evenly spaced from the wall. Small things no one asked for, but he wanted to do them right, not out of fear of reprimand, but out of respect for others, even those he'd never meet. Mid-shift, Brenda did a surprise inspection. She looked around the floor and smiled. "You cleaned this area?" "Yes, it's noticeably cleaner tonight." Aaron just smiled. "Thank you. I figured if I don't leave a little kindness in this place, then today would be a waste." Brenda studied him a moment and nodded. "Sounds like someone about to write a philosophy book." "No," he said, half joking, half serious. "I just mopped floors." At dawn, when the clock struck 6, the building still glowed with warm yellow light. Aaron stood on the top floor, looking down at a Chicago still asleep. Snow blanketed the roofs. Steam lifted from the river. He thought of me, the woman who had built a life with her hands, taught him about limits, then forced him to fall so he could understand them. Now in that silence, he wasn't afraid anymore. He felt at peace. On his weekend morning off, he stayed home and tidied the small room. On the wall, beside the two lists, 10 mistakes and 10 actions to make it right, he taped a new sheet in straight, firm handwriting. The old privilege is dead. A new honor is alive. He looked at the line and chuckled. Not a proud laugh, but the laugh of someone who had passed through the darkest part and was still standing. Then he made coffee, sat down, and wrote a short journal entry noting the small things of the day. Quiet night shift, no one late. Nothing dropped. Miguel said his daughter is about to start college. My heart feels light. At the bottom of the page, he added a forward line, I believe in myself. In the afternoon, he called Noah and Sophie. His voice was light and steady, no longer shaky or strained. I'm okay, he said. I'm still working, still in the same place, and I'll keep it that way. Don't worry about me. Noah asked, how's Grandma? He hesitated, then answered. She's as strong as ever, and I think she's a little proud. The kids didn't fully understand. They just laughed. But in that laughter, he saw something he'd once lost. His children's trust. That night before bed, Aaron stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The reflection was no longer a worn-out man, but a calm face, bright eyes, a gentle smile. For the first time in years, he smiled without it feeling fake. No need to pretend he was okay. He really was. He turned off the light, stepped out, opened the drawer, took my letter and read it once more. Just 6 lines, and he knew them by heart. I have read it many times. I'm glad you're growing up. He folded it, put it back carefully, and looked around the small room. Outside, the city slept. Snow fell again. He lay down, pulled up the blanket, and whispered like a promise to himself, I'll keep going, Mrs. Price. Not mother, keeping the distance. But for the first time, there was light in that distance, a mutual respect. At 10 p.m. the next night, he put on his uniform, grabbed his bag, and headed out. The cold wind swept his face, but he didn't raise his collar anymore. He inhaled deeply, catching the scent of metal, snow, and coffee, the smell of a real life. When the train roared past, a green reflection washed over his face, and Aaron smiled faintly. No one knew what was in his coat pocket, just a worn wallet, a family photo, and my letter. But for him, that was enough for a peaceful life. He reached Keogh Towers, greeted the guard, tapped his badge, and stepped into the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, the same old mop, the same chemical smell, the same cold white lights. But his heart had changed. Because now he wasn't cleaning floors to make a living. He was guarding the honor he had just found again. When Aaron's letter reached me, I already knew it would, not because a courier warned me, but because I had a feeling. I held the envelope, my thumb tracing the edge like touching a warm memory. Thin paper, slanted handwriting, ink smudged in places, but every stroke trembled, so real I could almost hear his breath in each sentence. I read slowly. Each paragraph reopened old doors in my heart. He admitted everything. No excuses, no deception. When I reached the line, if I'm never forgiven, I'm still grateful because the consequences saved me, I paused for a long time. Oddly, I felt no anger, no pity, only a quiet that spread like the moment a storm finally leaves. I looked up and out the window. Snow covered the roofs. Streetlights painted pale yellow patches on the ground. The scene took me back to that Christmas night, the night I hit the cold tile, heard the glass shatter, and the forced laugh of the man who had once been my son. But what I remember most wasn't the fall. It was the moment I stood up by myself. No one helped. No one spoke. Just me, blouse-stained, standing in silence, wiping wine from my sleeve, looking around the table that had once been this family's center. From that second, I understood some pain isn't for revenge. It's to discipline love. Now, reading this letter, I didn't feel the need to see him right away. Not out of hatred, only because every crack needs time to turn into scar tissue. Meet too soon and the wound may reopen. He needs time, and so do I, so what's unfinished can settle. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the project files. Outside, Victoria was waiting in the conference room. We were about to sign a new downtown project, another high-rise with deep, solid foundations, like the way I still choose to live. When we finished, Victoria smiled. Eleanor, you found your balance again. I answered simply, not balance, Victoria. Learning to accept that justice isn't thunder. It's a slow dawn after a long night. From that day, every contract I signed had one small detail added. All net profits would go into a trust for Noah and Sophie. No announcements, no thanks required. It was enough to know those two would have an independent future, free from the weight of adult mistakes. I didn't tell Aaron, and I didn't mention it to Jessica. Some things are best done in silence, like rebuilding a foundation. No fanfare, no boasting, only certainty. At night when I came home, the room was the same. The chair at the head of the table was still empty. No one sat there. No one argued or explained. I walked past, paused a moment, and rested my hand on the back. I used to look at that chair with bitterness, a piece of evidence of betrayal. Now it was just an ordinary empty spot in a quiet room. Calm, not because I'd forgotten, but because I understood. Every story, no matter how painful, needs a silence to close. Tonight I poured myself a glass of red wine. The scent was strong but pleasant. I sat by the window, watched the snow, and thought about the path Aaron was on. I knew he was still working nights, still straightening the wet floor signs, still calling his kids every week. I didn't need to see it to believe it. Real growth doesn't need to be proved. It shows itself in steady actions. I raised my glass, not to victory or reputation, but to change. To the man who fell and is learning to stand up better. To the lesson I taught through silence, not anger. And to myself for choosing to forgive by not closing the door forever. If one day Aaron is steady enough, quiet enough, and sincere enough to come without asking for forgiveness, maybe this door will open on its own, not with a key, but with time and conduct. For now, it's enough to know he's facing the right way. I sat a little longer, then wrote one short line in my work notebook. Consequences teach responsibility, justice teaches humility, and hope teaches us to love again after we've learned fear. I closed the notebook, watched the snow melt on the sill, and felt light, like setting down a burden carried for a year. A warmth spread in me, not from the heater, but from the belief that every soul, if patient enough, can find its way back. I set the glass down, smiled, and whispered to the night, growth, the latest, longest-lasting Christmas gift. If you're hearing this, maybe somewhere in my story you recognize a part of yourself. A wound that once hurt, a relationship that cracked, or a small hope that still burns quietly. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe in a cold city, maybe in a warm room full of memories. But I believe each of us is learning to forgive, to stand up, and to be at peace with the past. If this story made you pause for a moment to think of someone or of yourself, feel free to share a few lines below. Who knows, a stranger reading it might find their heart ease a little. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can meet again in the next stories, where I'll keep telling journeys of mistakes, justice, and growth. Thank you for staying, for listening, and for believing that no matter how slowly, light finds its way back to hearts that choose to change.